I'm Ryan Young, on Facebook, Ryan Alexander Young. It's a 2010 BMW 128i. I've had it for, since July 1st, so Canada Day. Picked it up and it's been a machine ever since. My family's always been in cars, I guess you could say. My brother and my dad are into classic Mopars and stuff. I enjoy classics, but it's not really my thing to spend my money into and my time. I more or less started with Toyotas when I was a kid. I ended up getting a free BMW out of a deal when I was younger. It was a 4-cylinder manual with a bad clutch. It basically sat in my yard, and then somebody offered me a misfiring 6-cylinder coupe E36, and it was apparently supposed to be for parts car, but I didn't know 2-door 4-door at the time, didn't swap much for parts, so I got that car, fixed the misfire, it was just a bad plug, and ended up driving that car, sold the broken clutch 4-door, and ended up selling the 2-door, and kind of got hooked on BMWs after that. It was one of those things. I've always liked the looks of a 1 Series. I got a good deal on it. I was actually selling a side-by-side, like a off-road side-by-side. And as I was driving to go pick up a trailer to load it to bring it to the guy, I was just scrolling on Marketplace and came across the ad for this car and messaged the guy. And I was with my buddy Gab at the time. I told him, like, you're gonna hate me, I'm doing a really stupid decision. Because I was supposed to be selling the side-by-side to take money to do other stuff with that money. I ended up picking up the car on my way home from dropping off the side-by-side. And within a couple of days, I already had an angle kit, coilovers, basically everything to get it ready to drift. And I started cutting up the body. It wasn't exactly mint, but it was in pretty good shape. It needed a valve cover gasket, and it would have been great for the road. But I ended up just more or less cutting up a very good roadworthy car that I got for a good deal, and I have zero regrets about it. It's almost a tier 1. There's just certain things out of it, especially for winter. Normally this would have a bucket seat. It doesn't, mainly for fitting with a winter coat and for having the heated seat. The FDF angle kit in the front. It has a power steering cooler, which is very needed on these because especially with an angle kit, when you're chucking it back and forth, the power steering overflows after 2 laps. It's crazy. And then you got to keep topping it up, and everybody hates you because you're leaking oil on track. Not a good idea. Other mods, we have catless headers on it, which we just did ourselves. We didn't buy the set because unfortunately that's one thing, they don't have a cheap version for this car yet, like the E36 and E46 does. And then it's a straight pipe exhaust with a muffler on it. In the rear end, we've got a welded diff. Normally we would have adjustable arms. We don't currently on the car. We don't have a dual caliper setup. We don't have an e-brake at all in the car, actually. Got coilovers all around on it, Silver's coilovers. Not on for the winter. Right now it's got Bilsteins and some cheap coilovers in the rear. I didn't want to ruin the good Silvers. Besides that, it's cut for the angle kit. The hood latch broke, so we put hood pins, but that's minor aesthetic stuff. These aren't put on because they're nice, they're put on because they're practical. Clutch upgrade, that's a major thing on BMWs. The dual mass flywheel is not great, factory. And an organic disc, even a carbon Kevlar disc, not great. They tend, once they heat, they kind of like stick. And as soon as they heat up, they basically get destroyed. So a 6-puck is the way to go. Different diff ratio in the rear. We have a 346 out of a 335i. This one would have been a 323. We tried a 391 in it at one point, and it was too short because we haven't had it tuned yet for the mods. It will get a 3-stage manifold and a tune, which is going to give it around 300 horsepower. It currently only has like 225. The 391, the issue was with the clutch setup and the lack of power, 3rd gear was still unattainable, but then it made 2nd gear too short. You know, we were like too low in 3rd gear, so we couldn't break the tires loose. And in 2nd gear, we were on limiter the whole time. So the stock diff would have been a little bit too far the other way. We wouldn't have had enough in 2nd gear. So with the 346, it's perfect. And once we have it tuned, we'll be able to grab 3rd with the proper clutch setup. Then it won't be an issue anymore. 10-ish years ago, I met a guy named Sean Poirier, and I started hanging out with him, and he was into drifting. I had watched a bit of it, but never seen it in person, and never really got big into it. And I didn't have a budget for anything at the time. So he started showing me, he was building a rear-wheel drive swapped Evo at the time, and I kind of gave him a hand with some of the stuff on that. I learned a bit about drifting from him. So I ended up, once I got rid of that two-door E36, I found a deal to trade a snowmobile I had for a four-door E46 manual that needed a bit of work. And then I ended up driving that car for 2 years as a street car. I bought other cars in the meanwhile. I ended up at one point, I think, with like 6 E46 sedans in my driveway. It was stupid. But that's the one car that stayed with me for quite a while. And it ended up turning into the first JZ swapped E46 that I had. Then that shell, after I guess 2 years of street use, it already had 350K on it. Then I track drove it for about 2 years. Well, didn't fully track drive it. I took it out a few times, but basically I track drove it for 2 years. The other thing that I figured out with drifting was it's not really the same thing fits everybody. It's not one shoe fits all. One big issue that I had was I started out with a small budget, but I didn't know what to do with a small budget, and I wasted money on a lot of really, really silly things. First thing was a hydraulic handbrake. As much as everybody loves to say it, it's a band-aid for a problem. It is definitely a tool that is useful, but it's not something that anybody should have in a starter car. It's something that you should be able to drive around not having one, and then you will adapt to learning the car, learning throttle control, steering input, things like that, not relying on a handbrake. I should have learned to drive with a stock engine, but right off the bat I went with a 1J in my first ever real drift car, and it wasn't a good idea, mainly for the fact that I never got to learn on a stock engine, and the setup just had issues. Then came July and I bought this thing, which was a fantastic idea, mainly for the reason that it's given me tons and tons of seat time, and it's what gave us the idea to start this shop, more or less. Yeah, so the car also has 247,000 kilometers on it whenever I bought it. The ABS sensors haven't been working since I did all the work on it. So I don't know how much mileage it has now, but I probably added between 3,000 to 5,000 kilometers to that. Almost all hard abuse and track time. That's the difference of a car that I spent, let's say, sub 10K in versus my E46 with a 1J. The amount of things I redid and tried to learn and, you know, messed up and redid here and there. All that stuff amounted in the end to me getting almost virtually no seat time, wasting my time, getting frustrated, believing I was a terrible driver, I couldn't link the track. I was having all kinds of issues with the car, mainly due to the setup of the car. It was just frustrating. Built this car and it drives phenomenal. I guess you could say I've, in my mind, severely improved my driving this year. And also the other great part about the car is I was able to get a bunch of my buddies that have never drifted into a drift car for the first time ever. Still has AC, still has a radio, still has heat, has heated seats. So when we were at the track, I think that's what really hooked Nathan, was we're sitting in pit lane, everybody has their door open, it's a really hot day, they're trying to get air in the car so they're not dying of heat. We're there with the AC blasting, we got like music bumping with like really good bass and everything. We're sitting there, sunroof open, AC on, we're chilled out, we're really enjoying ourselves, we're laughing and joking around, everybody else is kind of crying in their car, you know, for an event that's not even a competition. So investing in a car like this, even if you have a comp car, is a great thing, because you're not breaking your expensive car, you're learning how to drive, you're getting as much seat time for as cheap as possible, you're enjoying the time you're out there, you're not sweating in the car, you're really having a good time. DNA Drift Shop is basically going to have the option of 3 different tiers plus add-ons to build cars, and the cars we plan to build are going to be E36, E46, E9X, and E8X chassis. This is an E82, which is an E8X chassis. It's not that we can't do other stuff, it's the main reason we're doing this is these are cars that we have learned, we know what parts go on them, we can successfully say the parts work. So if you get us to build you a car with these parts, no matter what tier it is, the car will be set up to drive properly, and it'll be a proven setup. So if there's issues from that point forward, it's the driver that needs the experience. It's not the car that might not be working right. So that's basically the whole aspect behind DNA Drift Shop. And the other thing is, because we have another business, we're not doing it for money exactly. We want to get more people out. Like, of course, we're making some profit off doing all this work, But because of the dealer accounts that we have, we're not marking up our parts over MSRP. We're trying to get people deals on stuff. We're not charging a lot for labor. Like a set of coilovers, we can install a set of coilovers on somebody's car with our custom specs for less than you can go on a website and buy them. We're actually doing it so that way people are driving with better parts and having them installed properly. A lot of people buy stuff, install it improperly, and then they have issues with the part and then call the part junk. We had no issues with this car at all. We had one issue. Mainly because we did a clutch setup in this car. The flywheel that I got off of a guy is technically for an N54, the first gen 6-bolt crank. It fits bolt-on an N52, but the disc spacing was a little bit off. So we had issues at first with the clutch kit that we put in with a stock pressure plate, 6-puck disc, and that flywheel. It's still the same setup in there. We got to take it out and do a little bit of work to that. It works, but if you want to add more load than second gear, if you want to go to like third gear, it absolutely wants to slip. So that's been a bit of an issue that we've been fighting, but that's mainly just because we got a used part that wasn't exactly for this car. If I would have bought the right flywheel right off the bat, I would have never had that issue. Once again, buying the right parts and the quality parts, not always relying on cheap used parts. The thing I love the most about this car, I'd have to say, is how it feels. It's one of the last raw feeling BMWs, same as the E90 chassis and E92 chassis. They still have power steering, they're not electric steering. They have a very well set up suspension design. Now I do add angle kits, so that's part of why I like the simplicity of the front end. The stock one works, but I don't like the multi-arm suspension in the front. The rear, you can get tons of grip out of it with just some basic, simple, pretty cheap adjustable arms. There's a lot of work you can do to make these chassis handle phenomenal. And the fact of it's just a very solid car. They don't rot like the 36s and 46s do. Like I've seen them in accidents, they handle them very well. They're a very stiff chassis. A lot of guys get into the older Japanese cars, but then if you want to build them into, like, let's say a comp car or something, you got to stitch weld the whole car. Whereas these, you don't really have to. They're glued on every panel and spot welded in a lot of places. So it's not just relying on spot welds. That glue holds all the panels really, really good. There's a lot of BMWs in Formula Drift, Pro 1, Pro 2, that are not stitch welded because the actual chassis is strong enough factory. There's not enough aftermarket support yet. We've been pushing for a lot of it. We actually developed the angle kit with FDF for more of a budget version of a full knuckle kit. This kit uses an E46 knuckle, so it's easy to find used, a lot cheaper, instead of buying like the Wisefab and SLR kit, which is almost double the price. Like, it's very, very expensive in comparison. The other thing is, like in our case, we've figured out ways around most of that lack of aftermarket support, mainly from knowledge of what parts will work and what we can adapt or what we can buy that, you know, in certain markets that'll work. But it would be great if these had the support that 46s and 36s do, but they're getting there. They're just not there yet. I'd have to say my favorite mod about this car would have to be the welded diff. But it's the same with every BMW, because without it, literally couldn't do anything. I could have an angle kit on the car and it wouldn't go sideways almost, you know. The angle kit is great, but you don't need it. You can get by without an angle kit. You can get by on certain chassis without coilovers. These ones are stock suspension is pretty good on these. The main thing you need is a welded diff. Without a welded diff, there's not much you can do. So I'd have to say that's my honest to God favorite mod. Probably one of the times at iCar when we went out and had zero issues, and the best part is we'd be trying to get as many laps in as possible. So we'd have somebody at the pits ready to change the tires, and our buddy Gab would be swapping driving with me, or one of our other buddies would swap driving with us like Dan. So we'd come back, we'd jack the car up, swap the tires, the other guy's putting his helmet and gloves on, getting in the car. We'd put the new wheels on, torque them down, and get out. And we'd be doing that from the moment we showed up. So if it was, let's say 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, whenever it started, we're there till close. And we're trying to squeeze every lap out to the point where sometimes it's 5 minutes before end of track time. We're changing a set of tires, trying to get back in line to get on track before they close track. Like we're driving start to stop, non-stop. So plans for the future are to finish winter beating this. And I'm hoping that it's a champion, survives, and if it does, it'll be seat time car again next year, and hopefully get a bunch of people out to drive it. Finish my E90, which Once again, needs a motor. And I'd really like to try competing. Probably won't do a full series of DMCC this year, but I'd like to do a couple of rounds, mainly just to see if I can cut it, you know, see if it's obtainable. We'd also do intend to start doing not necessarily a fleet, but an E46, because that covers E36 and E46 chassis. Even though they're the same suspension, we're gonna have an E90 just for the wheelbase difference. These are 4 inches shorter in the wheelbase, and have them at the track. And we're gonna do more or less paid test days to get people to try these cars. We also might start renting these. So we're probably gonna do an event at Shannonville in the skid pad for complete newbies, and that's the Ontario guys. We're probably also gonna do one at Napierville on the skid pad, because those are 2 places for people that haven't driven before to get out and have the idea that maybe investing in this isn't a bad thing, I can actually do it. I guess the main thing that I have to say before leaving would be get out and drive. Stop building pro cars to drive with your buddies. As fun as it is, it's a waste of money. C times cars are the way to go. I've done the wrong way before doing the right way, and everybody told me, and I'm gonna tell people again, even though I know most people won't listen. As Chelsea Nofa said, weld the diff, do nothing else. Get out and drive. I want to drive with everybody.